The icy wind slices through the night like a blade, sharp enough to tear skin, cruel enough to remind her that she doesn't belong in this world of marble and gold. Lyra clings to the cold stone column, her torn dress fluttering in the storm like the wings of a broken bird. Above her, the villa glows with warm firelight, its windows spilling gold onto the snow-covered courtyard. Inside, the patrician families laugh and feast, their voices rising in drunken celebration of Saturnalia, a festival of excess and freedom. But freedom is the one thing she does not have. Their joy echoes like mockery, each burst of laughter tightening the chains she thought she had already escaped. Her chest heaves as she presses her palm over the red birthmark seared into her shoulder. For years they called it a brand, proof of her lowly blood, a curse that marked her as property. But tonight, that mark doesn't feel like shame. It feels alive. It burns with a heat so fierce that the snow at her feet hisses and melts into steam. A foreign power coils beneath her skin, whispering in a language her bones somehow understand, and it terrifies her. Behind her, the forest stirs with the crunch of boots. The Praetorian Guard. Their torches flare between the twisted olive trees, flames lurching closer with each breath. The sound of steel shifting against leather travels through the wind. They are trained hunters, relentless, merciless. And tonight their prey is her. Lyra squeezes her eyes shut, wishing she could silence the thundering of her heart. The guards believe she is just a runaway slave, guilty of daring to step out of her place. They have no idea what really stirs beneath her skin, and the truth is, neither does she. The birthmark throbs, pumping fire through her veins, and every nerve in her body screams to let go, to unleash something she cannot name. But if she does, if she surrenders to it, she fears she may never come back. The night air thickens around her, heavy with the charge of a storm that hasn't yet broken. Her breath hangs in clouds, mingling with the scent of iron and pine. She feels the earth trembling beneath her bare feet, as though the world itself is bracing for what's about to happen. And then she realizes, she is not powerless. She never was. She is not the girl they called weak, the slave they mocked, the outcast they branded. The heat inside her isn't a curse, it's a calling. Something ancient. Something wild. The torches blaze closer, shouts splitting the night. The hunters close in. But as Lyra presses her palm harder against the burning mark, her fear begins to shift. It sharpens into resolve. The fire in her veins is no longer unbearable, it is intoxicating. It demands release. Snow whirls in a sudden gust, spiraling like sparks torn from the heart of a forge. The laughter from the villa fades beneath the roar building in her chest. They think they know who she is. They think they know what she is. But tonight, they will learn the truth. Because Lyra is no ordinary slave girl. Not anymore. And when the silver flame inside her finally breaks free, it will not only save her life, it might just shatter the empire that condemned her. So lean closer, hold your breath, and don't look away. What's coming is more than survival. It's a transformation that will rip through the night like lightning. And once it begins, nothing in Rome, or beyond, will ever be the same. If you're ready to see what happens when a rejected slave discovers the power that could shake the empire itself, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because this is only the beginning. And you won't want to miss a single heartbeat of Lyra's story. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and I'll leave a heart on every single one. I want to see just how far this story is traveling tonight. The torches falter. Their flames shrink and gutter as though the night itself has drawn in a sharp breath. Silence spreads across the courtyard, heavy and unnatural, swallowing the guard's shouts until only the crunch of Lyra's own heartbeat fills her ears. And then, he steps forward. From the tree lean, a shape peels itself from the darkness, vast and deliberate, each movement carried with a weight that bends the air around him. A cloak of black wolf fur sweeps across his broad shoulders, trailing behind him like a shadow with its own pulse. The cloak moves as though alive, the coarse strands catching moonlight in flashes of silver. He doesn't hurry. He doesn't need to. His presence alone commands the space. The moon tilts, spilling pale light over his face. Eyes catch it first. Not the brown or gray of mortals but molten gold, steady and unblinking, the kind of eyes that once belonged to gods before men pretended they no longer believed. Eyes that strip flesh from thought, cutting past her trembling body, past her ragged breath, reaching straight into the secret she cannot name. Lyra of the silver flame. His voice unravels through the night like thunder rolling over mountains, low, resonant, impossible to ignore. Not a question. Not a discovery. A statement, heavy with recognition. I've been waiting for you. The words strike deeper than any blade. Her breath catches, throat tightening, body jolting as though her name is a chain yanked by unseen hands. She stumbles back, toes pressing into snow that gives way beneath her weight. Her eyes dart for escape, for the flicker of torchlight she expects still to chase her. But the courtyard behind her has gone deathly still. The guards are gone, swallowed, or silenced. Their absence weighs louder than their shouts ever did. He steps closer. Not rushing. Each stride measured, purposeful, like a predator savoring the final moments before the pounce. His shadow spills long across the snow, merging with hers until she cannot tell where she ends and he begins. You're afraid, he says, not accusing, not mocking. Observing. His tone carries something sharper than comfort yet softer than threat. Good. Fear will keep you alive tonight. Lyra's nails bite into her palms. Her pulse hammers so violently she fears it will betray her, the rhythm loud enough for him to hear. The flame inside her shoulder thrashes against her skin, restless, yearning, as though it recognizes him. She doesn't. She can't. And yet every breath feels drawn toward him, pulled by a thread she cannot sever. The moon paints his features in shards of silver. A scar slashes from temple to jaw, clean and ruthless, a story carved in silence. High cheekbones catch the light, but it is the mouth, firm, curved with a cruel beauty, that makes her chest ache with both terror and something far more dangerous. Who are you? The question rasps from her throat, fragile, half-broken, as if the night itself resists letting it form. His lips lift into a smile that chills and burns in equal measure. Not kindness. Not mockery. Something in between, something older. I am Marcus Aurelius Lupus, he answers, voice coiled like steel beneath velvet. Alpha of the northern packs. And you, little flame, are coming with me. He extends his hand. Fingers long, strong, veined with power. Not a command. Not an invitation. A decree dressed in gesture. Every muscle in her body screams against it, shrieking to run, to flee into the forest and vanish. But the silver fire inside her veins twists toward him, pulling, aching, longing as though it has found its source. And in that moment, the danger shifts. It is no longer the Praetorian Guard, nor the freezing wind, nor the empire that branded her. The danger is him. The danger is the way her soul recognizes his, as if they were carved from the same flame. Her throat tightens. Her body trembles. And still, the pull grows stronger. The snow underfoot hushes the city like a held breath, and every step Marcus takes makes the world tilt just a degree closer to something older than Rome. Lyra moves beside him because she has nowhere else to go and because every fiber of herself seems to want to follow, even when her mind screams to run. Her arms are numb from the cold and from the memory of hands that once tore at her, but the numbness is both a shield and a wound. It keeps pain from overflowing all at once, and it keeps her from falling apart in the shadow of a man whose presence tastes like wildfire and storm. Their passage cuts through alleys where paint flakes from shutters and dogs curl into themselves beneath piles of discarded straw. Lamps cast pools of jaundiced light on mud and horse prints, the city breathes around them in steam and the faint stink of salted fish. Yet the world within those small circles of light feels distant, irrelevant, unimportant against the pull that hums beneath Lyra's skin. Marcus walks with a quiet that irritates the nerves, every movement measured, every shoulder set as though he can feel the weight of an entire forest in his bones. He does not speak unless a word is necessary, and when he does, his voice keeps low, threaded with a wariness that suggests he is used to keeping secrets like weapons. Lyra's memories come like knives and honey, sharp, sweet, impossible to untangle. The first memory that presses against her mind is the smell of the temple, cool and incense-heavy, and the sudden metallic taste of a winter sun that cut through the courtyard as the priestesses lifted their robes and hissed. She remembers small hands, someone's hands, picking her up from cold stone, and the way the priestesses' faces closed into masks of outrage and fear. They had not touched her with compassion. They had touched her with ritual, with the cold certainty of superstition, and the certainty said she was a curse. Master Gaius had thought he could own a curse like any other thing. He had believed a name could bind power, he had called her useful, named her necessary, fit her into the household like another handful of grain. But she had been a fault line beneath the tiles of his home, and whenever she trembled the whole place would shift. She remembers Quintus' breath warm against her ear in the dark, the whispered promises that tasted of sugar and ash. She remembers sitting at the master's table for one night and feeling, for a flicker, like a woman and not a thing. And she remembers the moment the flicker was put out in full view of a laughing table. The humiliation at Saturnalia is a thing that still lives in her limbs. The crowd's glee, sharp, loud, like the clap of a leather strap, rings down her throat with the force of a slap. When Quintus raised his goblet and called her out, the room tightened into a drumskin of cruelty. Men leaned in to see the spectacle of her shame. Women lifted the edges of their gowns and mimicked spells with their fingers, laughing like girls who have learned cruelty as a game. Lyra's heart had tried to outrun the hatred in that room, but when the brand flared, silver and white like moonlight on polished steel, the laughter turned thin and high, and then everything went wrong. She knows, with an intimacy bred from years of abandonment, how people change when fear enters a room. The way fingers become claws, how eyes calcify into weapons, how sentences become verdicts. She felt iron at her throat and then boot heels in the snow. Her exile was not merely about leaving a house, it was a stripping, a removal of every belonging, every name that had offered her shelter. They called her Wolf to drive her from hearth and home, as though a name could sever a thing that had always been part of her. Marcus watches her as though cataloguing the lines the world has carved on her. He does not stop to probe in the way other men had, he does not offer platitudes or false tenderness. Instead, he levels his gaze at the horizon as if looking for something beyond Rome's tile and timber, and in that moment Lyra sees him both as a wall and a window. There is a scarcity of softness about him, but when softness appears it is not slack, it is fierce and brief, a carefully measured offering that leaves her more raw than the harsh words she has gotten used to. You carry your past like a live ember, he says, and the words are not pity, not cruelty, but acknowledgement. The ember inside her answers with a shiver. It has always been both a wound and a promise. Do not let it burn you whole. She wants to laugh at the advice, wants to tell him she is already hollow, but the laugh dies in her throat. Instead she asks, why did you help me? The question is a thin thread held between her teeth, fragile and dangerous. Marcus's jaw tightens as if she has pulled at something buried beneath his skin. For a moment his face betrays him, traces of a life that is not the present life, of burdens older than his rule. Because you were not theirs to break, he says finally. His hand, the one he had offered at the courtyard, brushes the air as if rearranging fate. It is an odd, simple gesture, but it carries with it the weight of command and the faint promise of protection. Lyra wants to test him, draw a boundary to see if he will honor it, but fear and curiosity entwine until she cannot tell which feeling leads. The silver flame at her shoulder thrums like a second heartbeat, and when she shifts her coat to scratch an itch beneath the skin she feels it ripple through bone like a tune only she can hear. It answers to him in a way she has not yet learned to translate. The recognition is animal and immediate, not intellectual. It scrolls across her nerves in a language that predates words. You are of us, it tells her, you are of him. As they move deeper into the city, the air grows denser, occupied with secrets and unspoken laws. They pass a courtyard where lanterns hang like low moons and a boy hawks roasted chestnuts, their skins opening to steam like small exhalations. The boy does not flinch nor does he stare, he has either been taught fear or taught indifference. Marcus nods once to him, brief as a shadow, and the boy nods back, not scared now, not curious. It is a small exchange, but it feels like proof that Marcus speaks a language older than the Empire's Latin, one of small debts and quiet codes. He does not speak of pack politics. He need not. The weight of his name, Marcus Aurelius Lupus, alpha of the northern packs, settles on Lyra with the gravity of an omen. There are leaders and there are rulers, and Marcus is both. Authority roosts in him like a bird of prey, alert and raw, wings ready. He moves through people in a way that makes space for himself and takes it, and yet there is restraint to the way he touches the world. He is practiced in the art of control. Control is something Lyra has never had. She remembers the first time her body betrayed her, the way a thread of flame had slid from her shoulder like water and licked a set of iron tongs clean of rust. The men who had raised the tongs had recoiled as if a god had snatched their fingers. The animals in the compound had turned their heads and bowed like worshippers. Those moments when the world obeyed her terrorize her more than the beatings, because they claim a kinship she had never been taught to respect. She learned to hide, to make herself small, to breathe around the ember so it would not flare to the point of no return. Marcus sees the thing she hides. It's not a grand revelation, it's the way her shoulders inch every time a torch passes, the way her fingers curl under the shadow of her cloak. He watches, not to pounce, but with that analyst's patience of a predator who knows a thing's pattern. You called it an ember, he says again, almost to himself. More accurate than you know. Lyra bites down on a line of thought that wants to rise into complaint. She does not know what he wants from her. She does not know whether his intentions are crown-worthy or selfish. She has been used as object and ornament, and the thought of being claimed by a wolf-shifted alpha ignites a complex cocktail of dread and yearning, an ache that feels like both a wound and a homecoming. She had never allowed herself to imagine belonging to anyone. Belonging had been a word for other people, a poem she read and then folded away. Marcus halts them before a narrow archway, the walls on either side striped with shadow and graffiti. Under the arch, packs of people shelter from wind that seems intent on stealing breath. He looks at Lyra the way a man might look at a horse he plans to ride long distances, evaluative, considerate, and privately pleased. He turns his head, and for the first time since they left the villa, he offers her a small, rare smile. It is not warm, it is not cruel, it is a recognition that reaches him through the ages of 1,000 hunts. This way, he says, and with that one word he opens up a passage into something else. They pass through into a courtyard that tastes of wood smoke and iron. There is a closeness here, a sense of walls pressed inward to form a shield, and the air inside feels crowded with lives tangled together. A woman with a sharp face and a scar that maps her cheek sits knitting by a brazier, a man with missing teeth sharpens blades with a rhythm like prayer. The place is a monastery for those who live outside the law and within the logic of the night, soldiers, outcasts, the kind of folk who keep secrets under their bedsheets. Lyra's skin prickles as if remembering 1,000 small humiliations. Her hand finds the brand on her shoulder though she had meant to keep it hidden. The scar there is a map of old shame, the mark that named her. Now that Marcus has been near, that brand vibrates differently, the silver flames pulse aligns to something in his presence. Recognition is not always kind. Sometimes it is merely the truth arriving like winter, inevitable, unmerciful, and strangely clarifying. Marcus places a hand on the brazier's rim and the flame leans toward his palm as if greeting an old friend. Lyra watches the way his fingers flare, not with heat, but with a kind of calm authority. He seems to pull from the world the ease he needs. The people around him accept him with a deferential glance that is neither servile nor warm. They treat him like the central point of a sun that the rest of the courtyard orbits. His power hums like a taut wire under the skin of things. You will meet them, he says simply. The ones who will decide if you can wear a new name. Lyra wants to protest. She wants to say that names are chains and that she has been bound too long already. Yet something in Marcus's phrasing, new name, thrums a chord inside her like a bell. Names have always been weapons. But sometimes they are keys. The council that greets her is not as she imagines it. These are not noblemen with clipped cloaks and bright togas, these are weathered faces, mouths like old seams, eyes that have been sharpened by hunger and held by the memory of sacrifice. They look at her with questions that go deeper than curiosity. One old man, his hair white as the salt that sweeps the sea, peers at her and does not flinch. His inspection is like a surgeon's, clinical and kind in ways Lyra has rarely seen. Another, a woman with a hand scarred by swordplay, studies Lyra's hands as if reading letters written in knuckles and calluses. They do not ask what she can do, they observe what she is. It is a small, vital difference. "What is your name?" the old man asks. It is not a trap. It is invitation. The question lands and lingers. Lyra swallows, and the sound she makes is a soft, practical thing. Names have always been dangerous for her, speaking them aloud felt like opening a door in the dark. "Lyra," she says. The name tastes strange and familiar in her mouth. It feels like a coin she found in a gutter and then polished until it shone. "Lyra of the Silver Flame," Marcus supplies, as if blessing and ownership might exist in the same breath. The mention of flame makes a ripple run through the council's faces. They exchange looks that are older than gossip. The old man nods once, slowly. "We have been waiting," he says, and the words are both comfort and indictment. It takes hours, counted in small examinations and the slow, ritualized questions of those who have lived by hierarchy rather than law. They test her, not with cruel gimmicks, but with small tasks, lifting weights that seem heavier than they should be, moving through an obstacle that challenges balance and instinct. Each time the silver fire hums beneath her skin, it does not obey her so much as resonate with the environment like a tuned instrument. When she reaches out to steady herself on the handle of a wooden beam, the metal nearby sings a little with frost. The council watches that with turning eyes, none of them look surprised anymore. They see the world in the way predators see, patterns, weak points, possible alliances. Marcus does not intercede unless the council's eyes sharpen to a point she could not survive. He allows her to be exposed and then offers the shelter of his shadow like a shield. There is a line in his attention where a hawk would be proud. Sometimes his face loosens into something almost human, a small expression that betrays loneliness. For a man who is alpha, loneliness must be heavy, rule is a crown that isolates. Yet his loneliness makes his rare moments of tenderness sharper, like a hidden blade that cuts to the heart. As the night slides toward the hour when stars look like coins scattered on velvet, Marcus leads Lyra away from the council and out toward the river. The moon hangs swollen and white above them, a buffet of light that presses the city into a high-contrast landscape. The river is a black mirror broken by the flash of a fish and the slow, deliberate passage of a boat. They stand on the bank where reeds bow in the wind and the cold bites the bone. The moonlight finds Lyra's shoulder and the brand throbs with a heat that makes her gasp. "You feel it now," Marcus says. His voice is nearer, stripped of the public edges. He steps so close that his breath fogs between them. "The pull of the moon. It is not merely a mark, Lyra. It is a blood call." The phrase lands like thunder in a dry sky. She tries to make sense of the words. Blood call, language of wolves and cycles, means things she has not been taught. It suggests ancestry and design, a pattern stitched to her flesh long before she learned to fear. "I was left at a temple," she says haltingly. "They said I was cursed." "They said many things," Marcus replies. There is no bitterness in him when he says it. He does not justify the priest's cruelty, he just states fact. They took a child they could not own and replaced her with a myth. The pact keeps facts that the city forgets. We remember lines of blood and how they travel. He studies her as if trying to find a seam to stitch a truth into. "You are not the property of men who brand, Lyra. You are of something older." The words unfurl inside her like a map. Older than Rome. Before the priests. Before the law. A lineage that steps silently through time, bearing fates like heirlooms. The idea that she is part of something that predates her shame both humbles and terrifies her. The knowledge offers a ladder, but the rungs are slippery with the oil of doubt. Marcus kneels and pulls his cloak away at the shoulder to reveal the fur beneath, and there, against his collarbone, a line of scars weaves like geography. The sight of his wounds, worn without apology, teaches Lyra about survival. Scars are not only markers of pain, they are maps of endurance. They say that something has been fought and survived, that someone walked through fire and carried themselves out the other side. You will not be simple to the city, Marcus warns, and yet his voice holds no regret. You will be dangerous to those who would bind you, and to some of us who have old oaths. The sentence is both caution and a kind of promise. He does not pretend that her journey will be painless. He does not pretend it will be solitary. But he offers a hand in the shape of leadership, not domination. If she follows, there will be a price and a shelter. Lyra feels the tug of that offer in the marrow of her bones. Shelter is a foreign word, rare and glittering in the emptiness of her life. She has known hidden corners and locked chests, but not a place where someone would stand guard at the doorway and hold the line. The notion opens doors within her she had locked and then forgotten the keys to. She is, for a moment, a small child again, considering the improbability of being chosen by a man whose eyes know seasons. You will have enemies, Marcus adds softly, as if laying a map of the future on the table between them. And you may find that some of your allies are the kinds of people you will hunger for but cannot trust. Lyra grasps the honest cruelty of his words. Trust is a currency she cannot spend lavishly. The thought of new enemies tightens her gut. Yet she sees, too, a strange clarity in the warning. Marcus is not offering her shelter like a bribe, he is offering her a mirror. He will show her what being claimed means, good and bad, and he will not rub cotton wool over the thorns. The moon crests the highest ridge and everything changes pitch. The silver flame on Lyra's shoulder, which has been a background hum her entire life, surges like tidewater. The sensation is not cinematic, it is practical and urgent. Muscles click awake, sinew remembers a cadence it had earlier forgotten. Pain sharpens at the edges of her vision as if the flame has started a kiln inside her. Her breath comes in quick, shallow bursts. Marcus is instantly at her side, and though his touch is careful it brims with an impatience close to reverence. Let it happen, he murmurs. Do not fight the shape. There is terror in the surrender. Surrender has been the currency of her abuse, the means by which men took what they wanted without consequence. Yet this demand is different, it is not surrender to another's will but to a body that is as much a truth as her name. If she lets go, if she allows the flame to run the lines laid beneath her skin, something like clarity might follow. The idea both allays fear and sharpens it. Clarity can heal, but it can also expose things that had been hidden for a reason. Lyra presses her hand against the brand. It is hot, but not with pain, the heat is an old friend calling her home. Wherever the flame climbs beneath her flesh, sound changes, the croak of a distant frog, the sigh of the river, the rustle of wind through reed, each shifts like an instrument tuned differently. She feels, absurdly, like a bell being polished right before a peal. Okay. The first change hurts like a betrayal. Bones pop like twigs, ligaments stretch as if remembering the curvature of a run. Her ears elongate in a subtle, animal way, nothing grotesque, just the body's method of tasting the night. Fur crawls under the skin in a whisper-soft shudder and ice and heat swap places along her spine. Lyra cries out once, low and animal, an unformed sound that rises from the part of her that has always known the forest's logic. Marcus holds her as the body reshapes. His hands are not intrusive, they are anchors. He steadies the world with the kind of presence that had earned him alpha. The moonlight catches his jawline and makes him look carved from the same night as the trees. He does not look at her with pity, he looks at her with something that resembles recognition and pain. When she comes back, if she comes back the same at all, she will be altered. The city may still see a brand and call her curse, but something in her will have shifted enough to cut a swath through the old scripts written on her skin. The transformation is not a theatrical shedding of humanity, it is a layering. The human heart remains, complicated and fragile, the wolf beneath it does not erase emotion so much as give it teeth and a willingness to use them. Lyra's first howl is small and private, an involuntary release that tastes like grief and relief intertwined. It is an honesty that no one in the villa ever taught her how to voice. The sound slices across the water and into the trees, making birds leap and dogs in the distance tilt their heads. In response, a lone wolf answers from somewhere unseen, the return call of the wild. The two sounds braid into a single thread that seems to stitch the world differently around her. Marcus's face softens into something almost tender as he listens. He kisses the top of her head, a mark of possession not in the vulgar sense but in the old, covenantal way. The gesture terrifies and soothes in equal measure. It is an intimate thing to be touched by someone who understands the music of the night. That kiss is not a claim to crush but a promise to guard. Lyra feels the moon's pull recede like a tide, leaving her raw and real. A new hunger sits beneath her sternum, not for flesh, but for belonging and for the chance to answer a call that may have been written in blood long before. She looks at Marcus with a vulnerability that makes her feel dangerously naked, but also ablaze with a truth she had not known she could hold. "You will have to learn the rules," Marcus says quietly. "And some of those rules are older than your fear. But for now, rest." Lyra allows herself to be led. The city does not forgive the transformed in a day. There will be whispers and there will be stares, but she walks with a steadiness she did not own an hour ago. Her steps are the steps of someone who has looked into the dark and chosen to answer. The embers that had once seared her into exile now bristle with a new shape of power. In the hush that follows, Lyra understands with a painful, crystalline clarity that nothing will be easy, that being claimed by the pack is both a sanctuary and a gauntlet. The Alpha who saved her is not a simple savior nor a cartoon tyrant. He is a man with an empire of wolves to command, with enemies stitched into the world like barbed wire, and with secrets that will demand payment. But at the margin of that danger is a promise, that she will no longer be anonymous in the way that was once her identity. The night bends to them as they move deeper into the city, and beyond the ringing edges of her change a horizon forms. There will be tests that strain loyalty, betrayals that gouge trust, and a kind of love that will demand both surrender and rebellion. Lyra's story, born in a temple and ignited under humiliation, will be rewritten by teeth and moonlight. The silver flame that once felt like a wound is starting to feel like an instrument, sharp, precise, and finally, possibly hers. And though the path ahead is carved with danger, it also tastes like a beginning that has nothing to do with the pity of those who exiled her. It is a beginning that hums with the truth of blood and moon and the promise that when two fires meet, one born of shame and one born of rule, they can forge something neither would become alone. The snow-laden wind carried the scent of iron and smoke, foreign in a land that had only ever smelled of pine and wet earth. Lyra stirred in her hidden cave, silver fire curled around her body like a living cloak. Her pulse quickened before her mind caught up, her instincts whispering danger long before the words reached her ears. Roman voices. Boots crushing leaves. Armor clinking faintly beneath wool cloaks. And one voice above the rest, smooth, familiar, denim laced with arrogance. Quintus. Her chest tightened, the old wound reopening at the sound of his tongue-shaping commands. She remembered his promises whispered in darkened corners, the lies sweet as honey. She remembered the laughter of the feast when he had thrown her to the wolves of Roman scorn. Now he had followed her into this place that did not belong to his world, dragging with him the same cruelty that had branded her cursed. Lyra pressed herself deeper into the cave's shadows, though the flame in her blood strained against her ribs, begging to burst free. She had kept it hidden in the city. Here, surrounded by ancient power, it clawed to be unleashed. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of the choice tightening around her throat. She thought of Marcus. His golden eyes. His hand extended toward her in the snow. His voice carrying the certainty of destiny she had never allowed herself to believe. Trust the goddess. Trust yourself. The footsteps came closer, crunching over frost. Torchlight flickered at the cave's mouth, shadows stretching across stone. Quintus's silhouette filled the opening, his posture regal even without the marble halls to frame him. He stepped inside, torch raised, and the heat of its flame seemed dull against the silver glow hidden beneath Lyra's skin. "There you are," he said softly, almost tender, as though they were once again alone beneath the olive trees. "Did you truly think you could escape me? That I would let you vanish into myth?" Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat she was the girl at Saturnalia again, trembling beneath 100 eyes. But then the flame stirred, wrapping around her heart with steady warmth. She rose from the stone floor, the silver glow slipping into view, casting her shadow high against the cave wall. Quintus's torch sputtered as if shamed. I am not yours to find, she whispered, voice stronger than she felt. Not anymore. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with greedy wonder. The stories were true. You carry the goddess's mark. Lyra, don't you see? Together, we could rule more than Rome. They spat on you, but I. The words snapped in her chest like chains tightening, the same chains she had worn since birth. Rage surged. The flame answered. The cave blazed silver, and Quintus stumbled back, raising an arm against the sudden brilliance. His soldiers shouted, but their voices were swallowed by the howl that tore through the night outside. Marcus. It rolled over the hills, deep and resonant, a sound that spoke of teeth and fury and the old law of the hunt. Lyra's blood surged in response, her flame thrumming in rhythm with that howl. The Romans faltered, their formation breaking at the primal sound. Quintus's face twisted, arrogance cracking beneath the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. He was not the hunter here. Lyra stepped forward, silver fire curling at her fingertips. She no longer shook. No longer bent beneath the weight of shame. The prophecy's words echoed through her bones, born of two worlds, belonging to neither. And for the first time, she felt the strength of that truth. The silver fire roared to life, licking across the walls, spilling light into the night. Quintus staggered backward, his voice sharp with disbelief. Hold the cursed one. Do not let her flee. Roman steel hissed free of scabbards, the soldiers lunging into the cave. The glow in Lyra's chest burst outward, and with a single sweep of her hand the fire flared into a shield, forcing the first wave to recoil. Their blades struck, but each stroke melted into sparks against the barrier. The cave trembled as if it too recognized her power. Fear should have choked her. Instead, her body steadied, her mind sharpened. The weight she had carried all her life was gone, no chains, no shame, no whispers of unworthiness. Only truth. The goddess's flame did not curse her. It crowned her. Then the howl came again, closer, tearing through the snowstorm outside. Marcus. The ground quaked with the rhythm of pounding paws. A blur of shadow and gold tore through the mouth of the cave, scattering soldiers like twigs. His wolf form loomed massive, golden eyes burning brighter than the torches. Fur bristled with fury, his teeth gleaming with lethal promise. Quintus froze. His hand hovered near his sword, but the tremor in his wrist betrayed him. A beast, he breathed. She consorts with beasts. Lyra's fire surged at his words, but this time it was not pain that rose, it was defiance. She stepped forward, silver light illuminating her face, her voice cutting through the chaos. No, Quintus. I am the beast you tried to break. And I am not alone. Marcus growled low and steady, circling the Romans, his presence a storm made flesh. The soldiers wavered, their Roman discipline unraveling under the primal dread of a predator older than their empire. Quintus's mask cracked, arrogance bleeding into fury. You would choose this over me? Over Rome? His voice broke, raw, almost desperate. Lyra's flame answered for her. Silver fire spiraled down her arms, curling into her palms until her hands blazed like the hands of the goddess herself. She raised them, the light spilling across stone and snow, and the soldiers shrank back in awe and terror. I never belonged to Rome, she said, every syllable edged with fire. And I will never belong to you. Marcus lunged. The clash was thunder, fangs, fire, and steel colliding in a storm that shook the cave to its roots. The name coils through the chamber like poison. Gaius Valerius Maximus. Even the wolves stiffen at the sight of him, their hackles rising instinctively though he stands far beyond the stone wall concealing us. His very presence carries the stench of death. I remember the whispers from the slave quarters, the way his shadow stretched over every child born with strange eyes or strange strength. They said he drowned infants in sacred pools, burned mothers alive if their sons healed too quickly, nailed men to crosses if they were caught howling at the moon. His reputation was not fear, it was certainty. Wherever he walked, blood followed. Marcus's jaw tightens, golden eyes narrowing as he studies the encampment below. His entire body is coiled steel, vibrating with restrained violence. Of course it would be him, he mutters. Rome never moves without its butcher leading the charge. My pulse hammers. I want to cling to Marcus, to hide in the heat of his presence, but another truth gnaws at me, sharper than fear: they came because of me. The Romans could never have traced these tunnels unless someone, drew them in. And deep inside, I know exactly how. The mark on my shoulder burns as if it hears my thoughts. My power is a beacon. The silver fire Rome tried to smother has betrayed us all. Marcus senses my silence. His gaze flicks to me, reading every tremor in my expression. What aren't you telling me? The question guts me. His pack stands only paces away, suspicion already festering in their eyes, Aurelia's especially. If I speak the truth, I risk losing the only sanctuary I've ever known. If I hide it, I risk leading them all to slaughter. My throat closes. It's me, I whisper finally, the words tasting like ash. They're here because of me. The chamber goes still. Aurelia lets out a bitter laugh, sharp and cold. Of course. I knew it. The Romans don't chase ghosts, they follow trails. And she's been nothing but a trail of fire since the day Marcus dragged her into our pack. The others murmur in agreement, fear crackling like dry leaves. I can feel them pulling away from me, step by step, as if my very presence contaminates the ground. Marcus doesn't move. He just watches me, eyes unreadable, until the silence becomes unbearable. Finally, he speaks, not to them, but to me. Then you'll make a choice. Trust me enough to stand at my side, or leave before the fire consumes us all. The words land like a blade, sharp and merciless. Marcus, my voice breaks. If I stay, they'll never forgive me. If I go, the Romans will find me and they'll follow. Either way, your pack pays the price. His expression softens, but only for me. My pack is already divided. You think I don't see it? Half of them doubt me, half of them fear you. But the truth, Lyra, he steps closer, close enough that the heat of him cuts through the cold seeping into my bones. Is that none of them matter? Only you do. I need to know if I can trust you, not as a soldier, not as a cursed flame, but as my equal. The intimacy of his words nearly undoes me. For so long, I have been nothing but property. To hear him speak of me as equal is both terrifying and intoxicating. Marcus, Aurelia snaps, fury in her tone, you can't mean to tie our survival to her. She's the reason they've found us. She's the reason Lucius is dead in his grave while Rome thrives. If you let her stay, you condemn us all. Marcus turns, his voice ice. Do not speak his name to strengthen your argument. My brother died because Rome is a beast that devours. Not because of her. The chamber quakes with his authority, yet the tension does not break. Every gaze is a dagger in my skin. My choice presses closer with every heartbeat. I draw a breath, forcing myself to meet his eyes. The golden light in them is unyielding, demanding, but beneath the fire I see the fracture, the man scarred by grief, still daring to believe in me when no one else will. I'll stay, I whisper. Not because it's safe. Not because I'm certain. But because leaving would mean running from who I am, and I'm done running. The silver flame stirs, coiling around my wrists like bracelets of light, sealing the vow in fire. Marcus exhales, a sound between relief and hunger. His hand finds mine, firm and grounding. Then trust me, little flame. Whatever comes, we face it together. Aurelia's voice trembles with rage. And when your trust destroys us? Marcus releases my hand and squares his shoulders to his pack. Then the blame will be mine alone. But hear me well, if you cannot accept her, you are free to leave this den tonight. The choice is yours. The silence that follows is brutal. None step forward, yet none voice their loyalty. They scatter instead, retreating to their corners of the chamber, the fracture yawning wider but unspoken. Marcus stays by my side, his warmth a shield against their rejection. His gaze lingers on me, softer now, intimate, as if he's willing me to believe the promise in his words. Trust me or leave, he whispers again, for me alone. And though fear still coils in my stomach, for the first time in my life, I believe. The cart jolted over ruts and frozen mud, each bump a small percussion on the ribs of the metal cage that confined her. Morning light flattened the world into hard edges, the mist clung to the trees like a shawl, and every sound was magnified, wheels grinding, soldiers' boots, the tinny clink of chains. Lyra pressed her palms to the cold bars until the skin blanched, and the silver flame around her wrists shrank as if in apology, ashamed of the spectacle it had made. Around her, soldiers muttered and spat, emboldened by the sight of their prize and the scent of victory. In their triumph they did not notice the way her breath steadied into something controlled, the focus of a woman taking inventory of her limbs and the prison that bound them. The camp sprawled under the lee of a low hill, a scatter of tents and hastily thrown palisades, banners snapping in a wind that smelled faintly of smoke and iron. At its center a larger tent had been raised and draped with finer cloth. Inside that tent sat the witch-hunter general amid maps and ritual instruments, a man whose reputation bent the air heavier than the winter cold. He did not rise when they brought her in. He only regarded her with a gaze that was both godlike and clinical, one that measured bone and worth and the currency of fear. "Young woman," he said without warmth, voice honed by sermons and the long practice of condemnation. "You are accused of harboring and aiding creatures of the old faith. How do you plead?" Lyra's voice came out thin but steady. "I deny what I did not do." She watched his face for the flicker of humanity she'd hoped might still remain in men who had once shown mercy. There was none. He smiled like a blade being sharpened. "You understand why you are here. The city fears what it cannot brand." They placed her on a low stool and bound her hands with silver cuffs that bit like winter. The metal ate at her skin and left a sting that made the tears come unbidden. It was not only the pain. It was the humiliation of being handled like contraband, the inversion of whatever fragile dignity she had scraped together in the hours since Marcus found her. The Romans moved through the camp with the mechanical confidence of men who believed the world had been built by their right and would remain so if they controlled the fires and the laws. Gaius Valerius Maximus watched the show with a surgeon's patience. He was an actor who had learned cruelty's cadence and used it to compose fear. Around him, priests murmured Latin prayers that had the cadence of knives. One of them held up a small iron icon, an image of a moon tangled with a wolf, and the priest's lips moved as if binding spells to their syllables. Lyra felt the weight of those words as much as she felt the metal at her wrists. Superstition had teeth when sharpened by law. "You carry a mark," Gaius observed, rising now and moving closer as if to examine a specimen. "A curious brand. Tell me, child, whose blood runs in your veins? What god stitched this flame into your flesh?" Lyra curled her fingers against the bars and forced herself into stillness. Names had power, and she had learned that the hard way. "No god chose me to be their puppet," she said. "I am what I am. I have never belonged to your laws." He laughed then, a soft sound that made something in her tighten like a wound. Defiance. Precious, but naivety nonetheless. The Empire does not tolerate anomalies. You will be studied, and if possible, if you can be cleansed, then you will be returned to the proper fold. Cleanse. The word hung like an accusation. In her life the only cleansing she had known had been scalding water and the weeping of mothers whose sons had been claimed. To them, purification meant erasure. Lyra's lungs worked through a salt of old grief and new fury. The silver fire within her thrummed like a vein of metal underfoot, reactive, impatient, but controlled by a mind that had learned to greet knives without flinching. Outside the tent, the camp fanned out into a new normal. Aurelia strode among the soldiers like a magistrate, the armor she had taken to wearing bright and clean. Her face was a shuttered mask, but in the small, fleeting ways she moved there was a hunger betrayed, comfort and power, an appetite that had been fed by betrayal. Around her, those who'd followed her plan walked with the air of the converted. Where once suspicion had shivered, certainty now nested like a beetle in the bark of a tree. Back in the cage, Lyra thought of Marcus, of the way his hands had steadied her in the cavern of steam, of the whisper that had asked her to trust. In that memory warmth rose like a lantern and then dashed when she imagined his eyes as they watched the cart roll away. Had his stare been hollowed by strategy, or had some part of him been broken when Aurelia fed him the lie? She could not reconcile the man who kissed her brow with the one who had authorized her betrayal. The fact that both existed inside the same breast made rage a sharper, more complicated instrument. The witch hunter did not waste time with long interrogations. He preferred ritual to questioning, and spectacle to subtlety. In the center of camp they prepared an instrument, a shallow pit lined with salted iron, the sort of thing meant to test what a body carried. The priests circled, chanting words that had been used for 100 years to scare the faithful into obedience. The soldiers watched like schoolboys waiting for a spectacle. Lyra stood on the iron and let the cold bite into the soles of her feet. Her skin prickled as if the world itself had opinions about what she was. The priest's words scratched at the boundary that separated her from the past, and she felt the silver flame rise like a tide in answer. She closed her eyes and summoned the calm that came with ancient nights, remembering the river's hush, the temple stairs, her small hands clutched by strangers. She drew the flame inward, it was hers to command, not theirs to play with like a child's toy. An iron bowl filled with salt water was lifted, and the priests offered it to Gaius as if toasting to a victory. The man dipped his fingers in and flicked droplets toward her face, each bead sizzling like insult. "Confess," they demanded. "Tell us where your masters hide." The question was not for the truth, it was a stage direction. Confession would make everyone feel like they had performed righteousness. Lyra said nothing. Silence was a small, stubborn resistance. She had learned that words could be twisted, turning warmth into weapon and petition into proof of guilt. So she kept her mouth closed and let the flame behind her ribs speak instead, a quiet, steady sound that translated into a burning resolve. If they wanted spectacle, she would deny them the spectacle of her fear. The witch hunter frowned as if puzzled by her silence, and he ordered the priests to proceed. They had ways of making the tongue loosen. They brought out instruments whose names were whispered and whose shapes made a woman's spine quail. Lyra felt the muscles in her jaw clench. Pain was an old friend, it taught focus. She braced for sensation, and when it came she met it like a tide, moving with it rather than being crushed. Days bled together in the camp, a harsh and staccato rhythm of tests and confinement, the world outside a rhythm of boots and the distant blade. Each morning the priests would draw runes in the ash and call upon gods whose names had not been sung in kindness for decades. Each evening the soldiers would recount small victories, how a wolf's trail had been doubled back, how a foraging party had been intercepted. Aurelia received these reports like a queen taking taxes, her satisfaction a slow smile that did not reach her eyes. Within the cage, Lyra paced like a caged animal until she wore the floor smooth beneath her feet. The silver flame was not idle, it fed the smallest acts of defiance. A spoon warped with heat, a lock that tempered itself oddly when a soldier tried to wrench it. Small sabotages that the Romans called inexplicable misfortune, and the priests called the work of demons. To Lyra they were proof that, even bound by iron, she had agency. Each success sharpened a plan, small, patient, like the slow carving of a key. Word reached her through the camp grapevine, snippets of rumor and the clumsy sympathy of a guard boy who'd once been spared a whipping for a favor she'd given in the city. He dropped a crust of bread through the bars with a clumsy hand and said in a whisper, "Some of the ranks don't like the hunter, sir. He takes glory where there should be caution." The lad's eyes darted and then shone with the foolish hope that had kept him alive. Lyra folded that hope into her as if it were a map. Allies were rare, but not impossible. Aurelia's triumph was not unassailable. Her choice to align with Rome had bought her a temporary ascendancy, security in exchange for compromise. She had given up a piece of the pack to secure her slice of power. That transaction had cost Lucius his life, she had argued, and in her rationale there was a twisted form of mercy, trade some purity for some survival. But bargains struck with a butcher never kept long. Rome always wanted more. The net Aurelia had cast would grow smaller until it strangled the very throat she had hoped to save. The fracture in the pack widened into obvious factions. Those who feared were those who could not imagine the future without Rome's promise of safety and social climbing. Those who remained loyal to the old ways narrowed into rings like the rings of a tree, concentric with a heart that beat for the hunt and the moon. Marcus's authority, which had seemed rock solid when he first stepped into the grove, now lay like a weathered stone with fissures spidering across it. The choice to hand Lyra over had not been a clean one, it had cleaved him into halves, one that feared loss and one that still believed in redemption. Word traveled back to the camp that Lyra had cried out as she was taken, that she had called Marcus's name like a prayer. Soldiers who heard the story took it as proof of her manipulative charm. Others, those with memories of their own betrayals, heard rage and sorrow and felt the heat of something larger than law. The tale became a tinderbox depending on who told it, and the pile grew until someone, somewhere, struck the match. Lyra used the days in the cage to study patterns, the guard rotations, the priest's changing rituals, the time when the hunter walked alone to consult the stars and the map spread over a table. She counted steps and watched the way smoke cut from the tent flap so she could time the guard shifts. Patience became the instrument that would open doors. She learned, too, that fury alone was a blunt sword, it needed cunning to be useful. Tempered by resolve, it could become a scalpel. At night she dreamed of the altar stones and the council of beings who had shaped a prophecy in tones of thunder. In those dreams the faces were not unkind. They were like weather, vast and impersonal, but with a tender cruelty that taught her to survive. Mercury-thin crackles of the silver flame played through those visions, and each morning she awoke with a plan that had been embroidered during sleep. On the dawn of the 6th day, when the wind from the hills whipped the prayer flags harder than usual and the priests chanted with a hunger that made the soldiers' eyes glitter, a small mercy descended into camp disguised as a misstep. The guard boy who had once slipped her bread carried a torch that smoldered too low and then was extinguished by a cautious hand in a corner of the palisade. While men argued the cause of the extinguished flame, Lyra felt the bars at her wrists cool minutely. The silver had a small fault, a hairline crack not visible unless one peered long and hard. That crack had been made by a soldier whose sword had swung too close to a bar and nicked it earlier. Lyra had felt that tiny shock pass through the metal, a small clue to the possibility that iron could be persuaded. The opportunity arrived masked as protocol. The witch hunter ordered a public spectacle to demonstrate control, an attempted binding of a supposed witch lion, a creature the priests had dragged in and stomped into shape with their own terror. The idea was to consolidate fear and his command. The camp thrummed. Soldiers crowded around the ring of ash. The priests had stored the tools they prized, the silver rods, the salt, the iron cage, and rested them within reach. Lyra watched the hunter move, watched the angle of his shoulders and the way his hands moved across the map. She watched Aurelia, immaculate and proud, approaching with the satisfaction of a general who has won a battle without shedding her own blood. The world tilted for a sliver as the hunter's attention moved like a sunbeam across the tent, and in that tiny tilt Lyra found the seam. She had been planning a path like a seamstress preparing stitches, silent, deliberate, invisible until the fabric had been altered. She strained against the weakened cuff. Metal groaned. The small crack widened under pressure, one edge catching the soft skin until it was raw. It would not hold long if she kept the strain slow and patient. Around her the priests raised their voices in ritual, and the crowd's murmur swelled. The guard boy passed the stool with a clumsy hand, nodding at Lyra with a look meant to say, "I am with you if you are brave enough to take me." His fingers brushed the bar and left it a fraction warmer. Heat can loosen metal a millimeter at a time if coaxed. Lyra breathed the way she had been taught in her first moments with the flame, slow, low, mouth closed. The silver within her did not need to rage. It needed precision. She let the calm fold into muscle and then she folded again into patience. When the hunter invoked the name of a god with a voice meant to fracture souls, she shifted her weight ever so subtly and focused every thought on that tiny crack in the cuff. It had a name now, possibility. Metal groaned a second time as if willing the escape. The cuff caught skin and then slipped. Lyra jerked, and the motion, just sharp enough, sent a bead of blood trickling that the soldiers mistook for a ceremonial sign and rushed to find a priest. In that confusion, a breath's length of human chaos, Lyra moved. She had planned for many things, but never for Marcus to be watching from a distance, hands clenched until the knuckles whitened, eyes a battle of vows as the cart that had taken her earlier pulled away. He could not help her now. She was alone with the small, patient machine of her own stubbornness. The bars peeled away in a dozen small sounds, none of them triumphant. The world smelled like wet iron and the sweet rot of tobacco. Lyra slipped free, the cuffs clattering to the ground. The guard boy's torch flared, and in that light she saw the shadow of someone moving at the edge of the tent, a shape that might have been mercy or might have been a trap. The camp roared around the staged spectacle, priests were shouting, and in that cacophony she stepped into a small corridor between tents, the taste of freedom already bitter and bright on her tongue. She had no illusions. Escape from a camp was a beginning, not a salvation. Beyond the palisade lay Roman roads and soldiers who would hunt like a storm. Beyond that were the city's walls and a law that punished anomalies with shadows and iron. And yet the flame in her veins hummed like a heart that had chosen to keep beating. She would not be a prisoner of their story any longer. Behind her, in the ring of ash, Gaius Valerius Maximus roared his outrage, the sound flaring like a struck bronze. Aurelia's face, once smug, once satisfied, went pale as if a wind had swept the color from her cheeks. Marcus, still distant, made a move like a man shredded by indecision, and for a single breath Lyra saw the man beneath the Alpha's armor, a man who loved and feared in the same measure. The sight steeled her. Whatever he had done, whatever betrayals had been chosen, her fate would no longer be determined by other people's fear. She slipped through the maze of tents like a shadow that had learned how to wear silence. Behind her, the camp descended into the chaos of discovery. In front of her, a winter landscape opened, sharp, cold, and indifferent. Freedom was a thin, sharp thing. It would cut and it would heal. Lyra shouldered forward, one small, decisive step at a time, the silver flame wrapped tight around her like a promise. The pack's betrayal had left wounds that would scar and split the ground of allegiance. But betrayal also revealed truths: who would seize power, who would bow to Rome, who would turn furred backs in the dark. Lyra carried that knowledge like tinder in her pocket. The mask had fallen from faces. Now the real work began, not only to survive, but to gather the fractured threads and decide what kind of fire to strike with them. The moment Lyra broke the chains, the world stopped being ordinary. Noise collapsed inward, as if the Colosseum itself held its breath to see what the gods would do. Sand steamed under her feet, turning to glass in delicate, crackling patterns. Priests in the imperial box lurched as if struck. Soldiers, trained to stand where empires asked them to stand, fell back, stumbling over each other in a panic thin with disbelief. The emperor's placid face, carved from privilege, went slack as an old story rewrote itself in live flame. She did not run. She stood and let the silver skin of her power settle around her like armor, a light that made the edges of everything pregnant with meaning. It was not merely magic, it was the answering of a name that had waited in her blood. The flame sang with memory, the temple of Diana, the first night she'd seen the moon carve a crescent into the sky, the hush of pack howls threading through 1,000 quiet years. It sang of things men had tried to bury and thought they had buried well. When she spoke, the sound trembled through the tears and into the bones of the crowd. It was not a voice of petty vengeance. It was ancient and direct, a bell struck where the world's seams met. The words fell like a verdict and a promise both: I am not your entertainment. I am not your sacrifice. I am your reckoning. The first gladiator who tried to prove his valor by charging collapsed to his knees as if a weight had settled on his lungs. The lions, dark shapes caged and primed for slaughter, shrank back until their great paws scrabbled at the sand. The beasts who had been raised to fear men now recognized a power older than their fear and bowed to it, not in worship but in a cautionary, animal comprehension. 50,000 people in the stands shifted from bloodlust to silence, and silence in Rome sounded like a wound. Above it all, the sky answered. Clouds thinned and then rolled into threads of silver, symbols, ancient glyphs of moon and wolf and root, painted themselves across the heavens in slow, terrifying strokes. The city's torches seemed small and feral compared to that silver script. In the distance, the hills where the pack had hidden trembled, and all those who had been hiding, witches who braided charms into their hair, witches who traded in herbs and curses, outcast shifters with teeth filed smooth to fit the city, felt the tremor in their bones. Something had changed the ledger of power. Marcus felt it first as a physical ache that ran like a blade across his sternum. He was not in the arena, he stood at the crest of a hill outside the city, a battered cloak whipping at his shoulders, boots planted in earth that remembered older orders. He saw the silver sky and his breath left him raw. It was not merely Lyra's spectacle. It was a rupture. The pack he had tried to hold together had been cut by an unseen hand, and now the wound bled into the whole world. He should have been furious at himself, at the credulity that let Aurelia's whisper tilt his judgment. He should have been raging at the men in the camp who had sharpened their knives into a chorus. Instead, he felt a cold, institutionalized grief that settled into him and made him small in a way a battlefield never had. He had given her away to save a pack that would now be rent by the consequences of his choice. He had watched the cart leave with eyes that remembered her like a light in a storm. In the sky he read the answer to the question he had not yet allowed himself to ask: what would he do when the thing he had feared and desired became a force no politics could contain? Aurelia's face changed in a dozen small ways at once. She shifted from triumph to a stark, animal fear. Power had been assigned to her by bargain, and bargains can sour into iron cages. She had traded a future for an illusion of control, and now the ledger had possibly been balanced against her. Her jaw clenched as if wordless recoil could set the world back to the neat divisions she favored. The pack's old lines, the ones drawn by history and hunger, blurred under the silver rain. Her plan had not anticipated the gods answering the call. In the arena, Lyra felt 1,000 hands claw at her edges, an onslaught of uninvited needs and fears. The city's collective memory searched for a seam to stitch her into, witch, omen, demon, savior, each label a different rope to tie her down. She refused them all. The silver flame did not simply shield her, it translated history into language and back again. She saw flashes: soldiers who had once hunted wolves in the hills now hesitated, mouths open to curses they could not unlearn. An old woman in the stands who had seen her child taken by conscription wept quietly, feeling the truth in the story she had thought too strange to be real. Her proclamation was not a threat to the commoners. It was a declaration of options. Embrace a world where monstrous and human can be allies, or cling to an empire that pulverizes difference. Empires, she knew, do not negotiate with myth unless myth breaks through and makes them listen. She made them listen. Something deeper shifted when she lifted her face to the pale moon. The silver light responded to her command and braided into a column that reached, improbable and fierce, toward the sky. Symbols burned and sank, and a knowledge older than Rome eddied down and touched her like cold rain. With that touch came sight, not merely of the present chaos but a map of consequence. The awakening would call allies and enemies alike. It would draw the hungry and the righteous, the petty and the noble. It would force choices with the blunt economy of war. Back beneath the hills, the northern pack stirred. Wolves in human form felt the pull and answered with howls that were both song and summoning. Packs allied with Marcus sent scouts hurriedly, with messages wrapped in bark and bone. Packs who had favored the city's promises tightened their borders. In cottages and cellars, witches tilted their heads and listened for the ways the air had changed. Lyra's flame was a bell tolling across a fractured continent, and every chiming answered with a faction. In Rome, the emperor's advisors clutched maps and muttered Latin that sounded small and brittle compared to the silver script unfurling overhead. Senators argued that the sky was an omen the empire could not afford. Men of law and men of arms bickered over whether to treat this as a rebellion or a divine pandemic. The Prytaneum, the building of civic hearth, remained silent because no lawmaker's voice could translate what it meant when gods woke up. Lyra, aloft in the air like some strange comet, felt exhausted and exultant in equal measure. Power had a taste that was both metallic and bitter and sweet, like stolen honey mixed with iron. She had not sought dominion for its own sake. She had sought a place where being what she was did not mean suffering the indignity of human cruelty. Yet as she hung there, high and visible, she felt the gravity of responsibility settle into her shoulders. Prophecy was not a favor, it was a task with teeth. Her connectedness opened doors of sight and empathy. She felt Marcus's restraint like a taut string, she saw Aurelia's fervor for survival and the cold logic that made her betray, she felt the hunter's roiling certainty, a man convinced that annihilation of difference was a civic duty. She understood, with painful clarity, that some who opposed her would not be swayed by mercy. They would be convinced by the blunt force of necessity or by the easier path of annihilation. In the hills, Marcus moved like a man remade by regret. He gathered what still answered his call, old allies, those who had not fully bowed to Aurelia's bargain. He did not run to Rome with swords raised. He tempered her resurgence with the wary intent of a leader who knew the cost of every step. He thought of the lullaby his brother had taught him as a child, of the crude, tender way Lucius had protected a litter of pups. He gripped his blade and let grief become motive. He would not let the pack evaporate under the Empire's legions without cutting a path that still left a future to carve. Aurelia sent messengers to the southern packs, to Brutus, to Cassia, pleading, bargaining, striking deals of her own. She wrapped her ambition in language about survival and integration, the only currency some would accept. Her fear made her cunning, she matched the hunter's cruelty with diplomacy that smelled of smoke and compromise. She would not be easily undone. The witch hunter's response was swift and brutal. Where Lyra's awakening painted the sky with silver glyphs, he spread a darker art, bans, edicts, proclamations filed in officials' hands and then spoken in public forums that turned fear into sanction. He summoned legions, and Rome's legions took to the borders with a careful, bureaucratic fury. Soldiers sharpened blades not just against wolves but against the idea of difference. Their orders were precise: capture the Luna Prima, secure the pack's leaders, and make the world plain again. Lyra watched the Empire marshal its machinery and felt the first real, sharp sting of the cost. Her rebellion would not be a glorious march in sunlit fields. It would be a long, complicated war that would ask for more than the lives of a few. It would demand allegiance, betrayal, cunning, sacrifice, and the willingness to hold others' hands while they fell. She descended from the sky like a falling star that refused to shatter. Her landing was not a victory pose. It was a careful repositioning. Allies gathered, some in awe, some in fear, and enemies closed ranks like clamps. Wolves approached with measured steps, citizens wept openly in pockets of the city that felt safe enough to show awe, and priests spat curses that smelled of old superstition and new panic. Marcus found her first, arriving in a blur that made the air tremble. He did not charge or kneel. He met her with eyes that had been scrubbed raw by remorse and necessity. They did not need to speak to chart what had happened. The silver sky had been a loud declaration, their faces were quieter countersignatures. He took her hand, brief, guarded, grateful, and in that touch there was 1,000 things unspoken: apology, need, an unsteady plan. He was leader and lover and man who had been tricked and who now had to do the hard work of undoing or making worse what had been done. Around them, the world reassembled itself into new shapes. War councils convened in the shadows. Witches began knitting wards in the night that smelled of rosemary and iron. Packs chose sides with a secrecy that tasted like guilt and strategy. Rome's heralds wrote lists like a king tallying his debts. And the dark thing that had stirred in the depths, the smell of it like rot and oil, slid awake and began to move, drawn as much by the scent of upheaval as by hunger. The choice Lyra had proclaimed in the arena no longer belonged to emperors or senators or priests. It belonged to every tired hand that had once been made to bow, to every wolf that had learned to hide its teeth in the city's light, to every child who would have to decide whether to grow up under iron or under moonlight. The Luna Prima had called the world's attention, and the world had answered with the ugly, beautiful complexity of living things. She stood then, not as spectacle but as the hinge on which a new history might turn. Around her, allies moved into place, enemies sharpened their plans. Marcus's presence at her side was a small, fierce island of humanity in a sea of myth and policy. He would be her tempering hand, and she would be the fire that altered the map of power. The sky was still silver, and symbols burned like promises. The first step had been taken. Now came the long, necessary work of turning a proclamation into a campaign, of translating myth into alliance, of teaching men why it was dangerous to fetishize uniformity. The moon had risen, the old ways were stirring, and Lyra, flame and wolf and woman, would not be anyone's sacrifice. She would be, if she could, the thing that made both wolves and men reconsider what it meant to belong. Lyra hung over the city like a living argument, silver flame still clinging to her skin as if the moon itself had braided its light into her hair. The noise of Rome receded into a kind of stunned hush, even the market cries felt polite now, like people whispering apologies to a thing they had wronged. She lowered herself until her feet touched the rim of the Colosseum, the glass sand crunching underfoot like a belief finally tested and found true. Around her, people stared with the small, human expressions of people who have been shown something they can't unsee, mouths half open, hands pressed over hearts, children leaning forward as if to catch a lesson. Somewhere in the crowd a priest made the sign he did when the world tilted and his gods had been proven larger than he dared allow. Marcus found her not because he wanted to reclaim her or punish her, but because the pull of what they had shared refused to be buried under duty. He came like the weather, fierce and inevitable, crossing the line of soldiers and priests as if the law were a stream he could walk through. He did not speak right away. There was nothing to say that rhetoric could fix. Instead he stood with the weight of a man who had misjudged the measure of another's soul, and that weight showed in the way his hands trembled when he unclasped his cloak. His eyes were a map of contrition, the kind a leader wears when he realizes the cost of misreading the hearts he promised to protect. Aurelia paced perched at the edge of the crowd, a blade of control that had been misfiled into cruelty. She had traded trust for an illusion of safety and, in doing so, had given Rome a reason to strike and a reason to fear. Now she watched the silver sky with a calculus of panic. Every god that rose was another ledger she had to balance, and she had very few favors left to buy back her conscience. Her jaw worked in a mechanical rhythm. She had wanted to save a people. Instead she had traded them a future written by other men. The realization twisted in her like a blade. For the first time since the bargain, she understood that survival bought on someone else's suffering was a debt that devours whoever writes it. The pack shifted in the hills like an answering ripple. Old bonds curled and then snapped, some broke clean, others frayed into strands that could still be woven back together. The southern pack swore loudly in the taverns and cleared their throats to speak of treaties and treaties betrayed. The eastern pack sent envoys who smelled of smoke and thought, and those who had no place to go but the wild listened and held with a sound that stitched the broken under the moon. Witches in their cellars, women who had traded youth for knowledge, drew lines in salt and whispered old names so their gardens would remember where safety hid. The supernatural world was breathing all at once, and anyone who had ever been hunted or hidden felt the change like a chill where summer used to sleep. Lyra's flame did more than scorch, it spoke. It let the world know she was no longer willing to be corralled into someone else's narrative. It refused the labels that had been nailed to her skin since infancy. And because it refused, people chose. Some chose to stand with Rome because they were frightened, because order had always offered them bread and a lid over their heads. Others chose to fall to their knees and wept for the insolent miracle they had witnessed, the way chains had turned into glass, the way a woman had chosen her destiny without asking permission. There were those, too, who chose a less vocal path. They watched from shadows and waited. Their choice was quieter, made in furtive glances, in aid given at night, an extra crest passed through a servant's hand, a map misdirected, a guard's blade dulled on purpose. There is courage in the small, unseen resistances as well as in the trumpet calls. Lyra saw those hearts hidden in the city's grind and kept them like coals. They would be necessary. The thing that moved lowest in the world, the dark hunger that had stirred when prophecy touched stone, shifted, sensing opportunity. It was ancient and indifferent, a predator that didn't moralize. It fed on upheaval, and Lyra's waking was a feast. Signs of its approach were subtle at first. Dogs in the alleys howled without cause, a fisherman's net came up torn where whales had never flown, and a fever of nightmares struck the poor and the proud alike. The sky's silver script meant different things to different people. To some it was blessing, to others an omen of annihilation. But no one could pretend the world had not changed. Marcus moved as a leader remade by regret, gathering what he could salvage. He did not offer grand speeches. He set plans the way a gardener sets stakes for a bent tree, firm, practical, and with an eye for survival. He signed alliances with old friends whose scars made them more reliable than politics. He borrowed forces from pockets of the pack that still trusted him and sent envoys to witch covens, remembering that iron law was not the only kind of order that bound the world. Each step he took was a small repair, mending trust where it could be mended, cutting losses where wounds were beyond repair. When he came back to Lyra, he did not demand forgiveness, he offered a partnership in labor, hard, necessary work to make a world that had been broken fit for both fur and flesh. She listened to his plans, the sound of him counting men, rationing supplies, and encoding messages into the rhythm of drums. There was grief in his voice, an admission of failure that was not a plea but a fact. She loved him and hated him in the same breath. Love and hate were now braided into a rope she would either climb or be strangled by. She could still recall his hand on her cheek in the brazier room, his words like the promise of home. She could also recall his silence in the moment of her handing over, a silence that had become a blade. Those contradictory memories would not make her brittle, instead they tempered her resolve like steel with fire. Aurelia's posture hardened. She convened those who had followed her bargain and offered them the pragmatic language of survival. She promised integration and protection in exchange for complicity. For some it was a welcome hymn, for others, a final insult. The thing about bargains made with fear is that they bind you to the originator of that fear. When Rome called its legions, it called them not to protect but to conquer. Aurelia's choices had bought a stone of safety that already had the chips of future demands. She felt it. She flinched when the hunter's emissaries spoke of quotas and the sorting of the supernatural from the merely inconvenient. She had not imagined the empire's appetite so literal. Rumors spread fast, becoming rumor and then becoming a kind of truth. Soldiers spoke of Lyra as both heretic and herald. Merchants whispered that the Colosseum's sands would never be the same. Children painted silver in chalk on the steps of their homes, doodles that their parents scolded away but could not erase. The religious argued theology in the forums, and those who had once been silent in the face of law now shouted in the piazzas. It was both revolution and revelation. People chose sides with a kind of terror usually reserved for storms, hurried, urgent, sometimes instinctive. Lyra, for all the mythic urgency sweeping the world, felt small in the quiet hours. At night she sat beneath the bare limbs of an olive tree that had been there longer than any of the men who plotted against her. She put her face in her hands and let the fire pulse a slow, patient rhythm against her skin. Power was not always ablaze. Often, power was the steady, grinding movement of people through fear. She understood that to win she would have to teach others to want the things she had become brave enough to embody. Teaching meant more than triumph. It meant patience, negotiation, and the occasional surrender to tactics she would not have imagined before. It meant twisting the language of threats into the language of belonging. Marcus knelt beside her more than once in those hours, his sword across his knees, the silhouette of a man who had been taught to solve problems with steel but was learning that some problems insisted upon other kinds of answers. He asked for forgiveness in ways he could not speak aloud, by making room for her voice in council, by refusing to banish the little kindnesses his people offered, by sending scouts to warn hidden covens of hunters' patrols. Each action was a stitch in a rebuilding he had the nerve to start. He wanted to earn her trust. Earning is a slow thing, often uglier than forgiveness, and he knew it. Aurelia recoiled at the new coalition forming against the empire's edge. She tried to manipulate the politics, sowing doubt in the southern packs, buying favors with land grants and citizenship promises. She held clandestine meetings in the dark where she spoke of compromise and how the world could bend itself around their fear. But bargains that require other people's erasure are brittle. The hunter's men took those bargains and filed them into reports, and with each written word the empire's machinery ground toward a final claim, bring the Luna Prima to heal or raise what shelters the old ways. And there was the hunter himself, a man who had made sanctimony into a vocation. He moved through the city like a ghost whose touch left a scar. When Lyra was in the markets, rumors of his name turned a man's throat raw. He did not see nuance. He saw an anomaly, an order to correct. To him, the world was a ledger of purity and contamination. That ledger would allow no negotiation. The hunter's warfare would be legal, bureaucratic, and merciless, the perfect instrument for an empire that had long ago learned to hide its claws beneath the toga and the law. Lyra felt the hunter's shape in her bones like the sense of a far-off storm. He would not relent until the city's ledger had been balanced in his favor. That meant she would have to do more than inspire. She would have to change the ledger itself. She would have to teach the merchants, the magistrates, the bored senators in their marble halls, to see the world not as property but as a weave. It was improbable, messy work. It would require allies she did not yet trust, bargains she feared, and a patience that would test the limits of her fire. Her first choice, immediate and urgent, was to rescue those still held by Rome's nets. She could not undo the betrayal that had put her into a cart under a hunter's eye. But she could strike where the hunter thought himself safe. With Marcus's scouts and the quiet cunning of the witches who still believed in her, they set plans like traps, false patrols, wrong leads, whispers turned into misdirection. It was the work of those who had survived centuries of being hunted, small, precise strikes that bled the hunter's resources and bought time. The first strike hit a supply line in the dead of night. Soldiers returned to find their rations salted beyond use, their maps redrawn, their horses restless. The hunter sent emissaries to demand answers. Aurelia answered with calm voices and crafted lies, but the damage was done. Overnight the hunter had to redeploy. Supplies were not something an empire could easily spare. Every logistic failure was a crack in the foundation of the hunter's certainty. Victories were small and costly. They were not the stuff of legend the way Lyra's arena appearance had been. They were midnight rescues and the stealing of a list of names from a lieutenant's tent. They cost lives and demanded bravery of the quiet kind, the guard who diverted a patrol to save a witch's child, the merchant who fed refugees at risk of his own life, the pack members who risked banishment to guide a freed slave through forested paths. Lyra learned the names of those who made sacrifice seem ordinary, and she held those names like a prayer. As momentum built, Marcus and Lyra learned to move in a rhythm, strategic, intimate, dangerous. They planned by day and loved in stolen hours, the kind of tenderness that tastes of smoke and wine and the knowledge that tomorrow's dawn might be a reckoning. It was not a fairy tale softness. It was a stitch of humanity in a world rapidly splitting into allegiances controlled by fear. In the quiet that remained between planning and battle, they held each other the way people hold fragile things against wind, careful, guarded, and awed. The city watched and chose. Some answered the call and marched at night under banners that read nothing at all, their faces a smear of courage. Others doubled down on order, lining themselves behind senators who promised safety for a price. Fissures widened and hardened into clear fronts. It was ugly and necessary. Lyra's declaration in the arena had been dramatic, the work that followed was quiet and vital. In the end, the question wasn't only whether people would pick a side. It was whether they would take the consequences of that choosing. Those who cheered for Lyra in the stands but refused to act in the alleys discovered that courage and complacency were incompatible. Those who'd formerly scoffed at myth found themselves in the strange position of needing it. And somewhere, beyond the brass of battle and the press of politics, Lyra kept returning to the simple question she had laid down in the Colosseum: "Am I your sacrifice?" No. She had declared it then and would live that answer now. She would not be used to fix others' fears. She would not be the price paid for a city's comfort. She would be the force that demanded a new language for living, one where wolves could walk the streets without hiding their teeth and women could carry power without being punished for it. To those listening now, who have felt their chests tighten at these choices, there is one last, urgent ask: tell me where you are watching from. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I will read them. I will leave a heart on every single one because each city is a place where this story can land, where choices will be made in kitchens and marketplaces, not just on stages or in marble halls. Tell me your city, and know that the story we are building together, of love and betrayal, of power taken and power reclaimed, reaches farther than Rome's walls. It reaches you. Decide. Choose. Stand. Or turn away. Either way, know that the world will keep turning, shaped by the small, brave acts of those who refuse to bow. Lyra will not be anyone's sacrifice. She will be the reckoning, the tutor, the wildness that insists we stop pretending uniformity is safety. And when the first battle comes, when the hunter brings his legalities and Aurelia marshals her bargains and Marcus bears the weight of the choices he made, you will know where you stand. Will you choose her side?